Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so happy to have so many people joining us today. We have guests logging in from all across the US and really all around the world right now. We are so grateful for your time as we share our case study, the value of conducting a library resource survey. And this was a collaborative effort, an investigation with Nova Southeastern University's Alvin Sherman Library and our team here at NewsBank. My name is Catherine Bergerson. I am the Vice President of Marketing for NewsBank. And as we get started, I just want to let you know a few housekeeping things. This session is recorded, and we will share a copy with everyone who registered for the event today. So that will come via email in the next 24 hours or so. Quickly, just a run through of today's agenda. We have a quick background on NewsBank. Then I'll turn things over to our panelists who will share how they developed the questions that were asked, methods to gather responses, some of the major themes that were discovered, and changes that were made as a result of the information gained through the survey. We'll share some lessons learned and some strategies perhaps to help your institution's library take on a similar endeavor. We will have time for questions, and depending on the version of GoToWebinar you're using, you may see gray bars on the side of your screen that either say questions or chat. You just open that up, type the question in there, or you may see icons on the left of your screen. You can see an example of what I'm talking about right now on my screen. Feel free to enter the questions as you think of them. We're going to gather them and then pause and do our best to get to all of them. If we happen to run short on time, we do commit to getting back to you in the very near future, but we do encourage questions. Quick background on NewsBank. We are a leading news and information provider to research institutions and libraries across the world, across the country, for more than 50 years. So we aggregate these news sources and we bring them to your faculty, teachers, students, and you can rely on knowing that NewsBank's sources are credible, are vetted, and global. Many are unique to NewsBank, and all are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from any device. Now, the reason that we're all here today, I would like to introduce Susan Berkman. Susan is the Assistant Director of Collection Development at Nova Southeastern, and she will tell us more about our panelists and our program today. Hello, Susan, and thank you to our guests for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Catherine. And now I'd like to introduce my esteemed colleagues, Jim Hutchins, Vice President for Information Services and University Librarian, Pia Chawanawatt, Associate University Librarian for Collections and Library Information Systems, and Jamie Goldman, Associate University Librarian for Public Services. Next slide, please. So our agenda for today is going to cover who was involved in the process, a bit about NSU and the Alvin Sherman Library, why we did the survey, how we did the survey, and when it occurred, what we found out, and then the important part, what we did with the findings, and lastly, some things to consider when conducting a survey. Jim, start us off with the who.
Thank you, Susan. So for an undertaking like this, there's definitely a village. A village can make it happen. And you see several icons here, and it really isn't chronological. It's, you know, the input went up and down this horizontally. So it started off with Susan in collection development. She came back from a conference and she had a survey that she had seen from the University of North Carolina, and she shared it with me, and I was impressed by it. So I said, why don't you work with the reference team and see how we can tweak the questions, and then we'll go from there. So that my part was the library administration. At that point, I was the only administrator at the time here at the Alvin Sherman Library. So before we went too far along, we have a very close relationship with the provost. He is a big supporter of the library. It comes from his time of being an undergraduate student assistant at a library. He'll tell you that. So he really thought this was a good idea, but then he kicked me down to the end of the very far right of this first line to institutional effectiveness. I talked to the vice president of IE and said, what do you think? And he said, well, it follows all the protocols for research, and you're going to have to wait like a month because we just put a survey out and we don't want to have survey fatigue. So then back to collection development reference departments. They work with product development with Peter, Simon, and Chris Cowan from NewsBank, start tweaking the process. Then we work with systems here so we could get some demographics on where the students were from, their level at the university, as well as faculty. We did this for faculty and students, so we didn't have to ask a lot of questions that we can mine from our identity management system. And finally, then marketing, the provost sent out a letter. We figured that if the provost sent out the letter, there would be a lot of credibility. Students and faculty would respond, and we were right. We had a good response rate. And to get to this point right here, well, there was data analysis too. Once we got the data, we worked with NewsBank and our institutional effectiveness and our own systems department under Dr. Hanawat here to crunch the numbers. And now we're here through the marketing of this webinar. So next slide, please. So the Alvin Sherman Library is on the main campus of Nova Southeastern University. It is a private, nonprofit doctoral university. We're celebrating our 60 years this year, so we're relatively new. The Alvin Sherman Library is a joint use facility, meaning that it's co-funded by Nova Southeastern University, obviously, and Broward County. So anybody that lives, works, or attends classes in Broward County is eligible for a library card. We're nearing R1 status. We've been at R2 for some time, but within 3 years, we think that we're going to rise up to R1 research status. We have 21,000 students, 25,000 public patrons. The NSU library system is comprised of 5 libraries. There's 2 medical libraries, one on this campus and one in Tampa. There is a law library right behind me. There's an oceanographic library down at Dania Beach that Jamie Goldman was the director for some long time. And then we have the Alvin Sherman Library, and it's beautiful. It's 80 degrees right now. So next slide, please. Okay, so this was really timely for me because I wanted to reorganize the Alvin Sherman Library and look at where there was opportunities for growth and what we could maybe move away from. And through that we developed a strategic plan that informed our reorganization. One thing out of that, I was able to create 2 AUL positions, and that's Jamie and Pia. And then through this is really a great resource to inform us on where we could focus our efforts and where we might want to pull back. And when we shared this with the provost, he was very thrilled, and we're excited to, I'm excited to communicate this. So I believe that's my last slide.
Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll be talking about the how and the when. So let's get started with the how. So first thing first, we distributed 3 distinct surveys among 3 groups, which is students, staff, and faculties. It was very important for us to understand the perspective of various stakeholders within our institutions. So tailoring surveys to each group can yield more insightful data, which Susan will be discussing the finding later in this presentation. So we also work with the Office of Institutional Effectiveness to coordinate with the NSU data. We cross-reference the data with our banner system to ensure accuracy and maintain data integrities, for example, colleges or department affiliations. And Jim had mentioned about the letter from the provost was sent to encourage the participation. It lends credibility to the survey initiative and underscore the importance and signaling to recipients that their participation is valued at the highest level of leaderships. So we also send weekly reminders. The survey was out in the duration of 5 weeks. So every week we send email reminder. As we all know, some individuals may need multiple reminders because they are so they can be motivated to participate to the survey. Weekly email provide multiple opportunities for them to provide feedback, ensuring that they have ample time to consider their response and overcome any barriers to participations. So at the bottom of this slide here, we saw the response rates, and we think it's acceptable. The student came in at 9.5%, staff is 28.1%, and the faculty is 30.1%. And maybe the faculty came in the highest because of the letter from the provost. But I want to touch upon the response rate a little bit. As we know, some of you may know that it's depend on several factors. For example, what type of survey we use. And, it could be interview, focus group, panel sampling, phone surveys, or kiosk surveys. What is the length of the survey? If the survey is too long and too complex, you may not get the desired response rate. Your target audience, how much the survey feedback and result would impact them. In this case, our student and staff and faculty populations. And what kind of survey distribution methods. In this case for us, we send an email out, but you can use website, SMS, QR code, social media, and finally the latest one is the AI survey. And last, but I think it's the most important, is survey incentive. So we also have incentive so we get a better response rates. May I have next slide, please? And now we are talking about the when. It took us 6 years to accomplish our goals, with a significant portion of that time attributed to the challenges posed by the pandemic and the allocation of resources during that period. However, what matters most for us, and is that we successfully complete the task, and we are excited to share our finding with all of you today. So we began the conversation back in 2017 involving the discussion of the resource allocations requirements between the two parties, which is NewsBank and NSU Alvin Sherman Library. Some of the topic of this discussion was, what are the goals and objectives, what we're trying to accomplish, who will be involved, as Jin mentioned earlier. There was a lot of parties involved. So we survey design software, what kind of software we use. We use Opinio software, survey questions, communication plans, data collection and storage, and last but not least, the budget and resource allocations. So we started to develop the survey in May 2019 with the hope to launch it in early 2020. And as we all know, what happened in early 2020. The first case of COVID was reported in the US on January 18 in 2020. By mid of March 2020, NSU went all remote. Matter of fact, between March 2020 to mid-August 2020. So we resumed our fall semester in mid-August of 2020 with the blend-effect models. Student was allowed to come to class either in person or online. So we thought at that time that it is appropriate for us to wait until early 2021 to launch the survey, considering the resource allocation that were being put to deal with the pandemic. So we finally launched the survey early of February 21, span to March 2021, which is 5 weeks. So survey durations, and then in April of 21 we gathered the data, explore the results, and make sure the accuracies, and we hand it over to NewsBank. Peter and his team went back and looked at the data, and by this time last year we were presented by a formal presentation from NewsBank, and here we are today to present you the findings. And I will hand it over to my colleague Susan to talk about the findings.
Okay, so thank you, Pia. I'm going to go over some of the questions we asked the students and those findings, followed by the same regarding the faculty. We were not going to be covering the staff part in this presentation today. So this question covered which services the students used. No surprises here that Ask the Librarian and the study room study areas, along with the technology in the library, were at the top. Study rooms are what circulate the most in our library. No one was familiar with our copyright office and assistive technology, but instruction, whether in the classroom or in appointments, were pretty low, as well as use of interlibrary loans. Next slide, please. The next question asked about resources, and the library databases and ebooks were high in usage. This is also not too surprising. Many of the other resources listed here are physically in the library, so considering the timing of the survey post-COVID, that is not exactly hard to imagine. Next slide, please. When we asked the students how they learned about resources in the library, faculty was the highest, followed by NSU orientation, which we call UNIV 1000 here. It's a 3-credit course that meets 3 hours a week, and they also found out through our programming. Our library ranks in the top few for programming of any public library in Broward County. There is room for improvement in librarian instruction, and at the time, we didn't have a dedicated marketing team. Again, keep in mind the timing, as I know there have been significant improvements made as a result of our findings that Jamie will talk about later. Next slide, please. So overall, students use the library to complete assignments, which coincides with the faculty being the source of them hearing about resources the most, followed by orientation. Study areas, whether collaborative or solo areas, are important. And once here or remotely, they use librarian assistance and technology. But fewer than half of the students said they use online databases and ebooks, and when they do use them, it's on occasion. They do use the databases for research, finding topics, and to locate readings for class. Next slide. When asking faculty what services they use the most, they too used Ask a Librarian as their top choice, followed by interlibrary loan document delivery, which makes sense for their research purposes, and then attending programs and workshops. Few use the Copyright Office and Assistive Technology Room. Next slide. Faculty also had the highest use of online library databases and ebooks among resources listed. Using library technology was pretty low on the list for usage. Next slide. Using the library's website was the top way faculty learned about our resources, followed by word of mouth from other faculty members. They seemed to pay attention to marketing messages. In-class instruction, orientation with the library, and subject liaisoning were on the lower scale. Again, Jamie will talk about improvements made in that area in a few minutes. Next slide. So this first finding reiterates what I said in the last slide. What's notable here is that faculty mentioned that they were made more aware of resources when they had a librarian do in-class instruction. Personally, I observed that myself when I did instruction, that there was always something a professor didn't know about before, even if you taught the same class every semester. There are many services faculty do not take advantage of and may not know are available to them, like our copyright officer and librarians to come to their classroom. And while databases and ebooks were the most used resources, the students had a higher percentage of database use. Next slide, please. Here are some things we learned from the open questions. For the students, they do not differentiate between services and resources. They do need instruction. And first choice, no librarian will be shocked with the results here. Google, Google Scholar, and the web are their go-tos. Remote students were less familiar with the library, and students felt that there were some restrictions due to COVID. On the faculty side, they wanted more accessibility to ebooks for class. Faculty orientation is necessary for new and existing faculty. They had some suggestions for additional resources, and they would like more communication regarding the library's resources. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to talk about what we did with our results.
Thank you, Susan. So now I'm going to discuss how we took the feedback from the student and faculty responses you just heard about and implemented impactful changes based on those findings. So revamped website. This included revising our events calendar to make it more user-friendly and informative. And these insights gleaned from the survey are still informing our decisions today, as we've been working on a website redesign for the last few years that we are hoping to launch in 2024. The updated website will incorporate feedback from the survey to provide an even better user experience and meet the evolving needs of our patrons. You guys heard about the reorganization earlier in this presentation, and in alignment with our 2021-2025 Alvin Sherman Library strategic plan and guided by the insights gleaned from the survey results, we initiated a comprehensive library-wide reorganization in 2022. Our aim was to enhance internal operations, thereby improving efficiency, impact, and the overall work environment. The primary objective of this reorganization was to strategically restructure and reallocate staff resources to ensure more efficient and effective services tailored to better meet the needs of our patrons. We also ramped up in-class instruction. We maintained our partnerships to include library orientation as part of the UNIV 1000 course you heard about, which is NSU's first-year experience course, ensuring that students were introduced to our services early on in their academic career. And our instruction numbers have continued to grow each year since this survey, showing our commitment to meeting this need. And this growth underscores the effectiveness of our efforts to enhance in-class instruction and highlights the importance of these initiatives in meeting the educational needs of our patrons. We've also been working to increase marketing of our program and services since the survey. And as part of our reorganization efforts, we established a new department, the Library Partnerships, Engagement, and Promotion Department, which is dedicated to enhancing our outreach efforts. And this strategic move allowed us to concentrate on effectively promoting our programs and services to a much broader audience, ultimately increasing our impact and engagement within the NSU community. We also emphasize library orientation programs for both students and faculty. And we place a stronger emphasis on those programs to ensure that students and faculty were aware of all of our wonderful offerings. Additionally, we are now prominently featured in the new online undergraduate student orientation handbook. And this increased our visibility and allows us to highlight our most essential services for incoming students, ensuring that they are well equipped for academic success. We also reviewed the results with library staff, and we regularly reviewed them and got feedback from library staff on how we could improve in the areas and track our progress. This included communication through email, an internal staff-only webpage, various meetings, and regular in-person town hall meetings. And also our faculty newsletter. We already had a faculty newsletter in place, but we looked for ways to enhance that to meet that faculty need from the survey. We developed college segments in our faculty newsletters and increased library liaison engagement to better serve faculty needs and interests across the university. Thank you.
Okay, so here's some things we wanted to share with you all that may be beneficial if your institution is considering to do a survey for your patrons. So getting buy-in at the highest level is a great idea. Our provost was very supportive of us. The email from him had a better chance of getting read than coming from anyone else, and that did prove to be quite effective. One of the other delays we had was that the university had other surveys going out around the same time that we wanted to do ours. We had to wait our turn to avoid survey fatigue, because no one likes getting bombarded with one survey after another. Find someone who has done a survey similar to what you want to accomplish and adjust it to your institution. There is no need to recreate the wheel, and that was something that we did hear from UNC's survey that they had done for their patrons a few years ago. Find out about the policies and practices at your university. Do you need approval to do the survey? Do you need IRB approval? Are there other considerations you need to look at to in order to go forward with the process? And then I found the free form answers to be the most useful, because this is where people could kind of say whatever they wanted to. There were many comments made about the website and usability and how they couldn't find things there. Suggestions were made for resources and more. It was also a place where many complimented library staff and resources, so that was a real positive as well. And now, since so many improvements were made, I think it's important for us to do a follow-up survey and address the needs of staff outside of the library, which we didn't cover today. Next slide. Do we have questions from the audience?
Wow, thank you, Susan, and thank you to all the panelists for all that information. Yes, let's take a pause here and just remind you, depending on the version of GoToWebinar that you're using, you may see gray bars that say questions or chat, or it might be an icon, and just type your question in there. We do have a few, but keep them coming. Question from Linda. Was there a reward for answering the survey or an incentive?
I can answer that. So there was an incentive. We had a drawing for a gift card.
And
that NewsBank provided that as an incentive. And they didn't have to, the only way they could get that was if they also gave us their contact information, but otherwise it was anonymous.
Are you comfortable sharing the amount of the gift card?
Do I remember? I don't know, I might need Peter's help on this one, I'm not sure.
We can get back on that one, no problem. What do you think were the most significant findings for your institution?
My other panelists can sure jump in here too. I think some of the things that we learned on the from the survey kind of they confirmed the information we were doing in our strategic plan and where we wanted to go. And there were certain things I think we had feelings about, but we now had some data to actually work with, and we're able to see which colleges were getting needed more instruction or we weren't touching as well as we could for others. And our website was one of the big ones because there was a lot of information on there about people didn't know how to find a journal or certain things like that, which they've been working on. And I'm going to let the other panelists contribute on to this question. Jamie, Pia?
Sorry, we were muted, Susan. So in addition to what Susan said, I was definitely going to say the strategic plan. What was interesting is we also did surveys and focus groups around the strategic plan. And it was very insightful and interesting to see that we were seeing similar answers from the NewsBank survey and the strategic plan survey, because we did canvass a wider audience outside of the internal NSU community as well. And also, I think marketing focus. How are people hearing about our resources and services? Where are we not meeting them where they like to learn about what we have going on here? So I think that was very informative for us.
To go back to the gift card question, because I do remember that, they were $25 for the students. It was something that was more specific, something more tangible to them. That was at the bookstore, and we did $225 for each 3 segments, and the other ones I can't remember, but they were all $25.
Thanks.
Thank you. A question from Amy, thank you, that talking about the response rates and a 9% response rate from students, were you happy with that, or what were you expecting, or how did you benchmark that?
I was hoping, yeah, I could say that obviously we were hoping to get the same response rate across all 3 segments. The provost carries a little more weight with faculty and staff when you get an email. We hear often that students don't open their email. I don't know if that's what our academic library colleagues think, but yeah.
I'm just going to add to that too, that NewsBank has done several surveys with other organizations, and they thought that these were good response rates. So I don't know if we actually had a benchmark in sight, but now we have one for the next time.
Which leads to
add to that, generally you have survey ranging between 10 to 30%. That's acceptable, and 9.5 is pretty close to 10%. So I think that's acceptable. Could be better.
Excellent, excellent. That actually leads to another question that we had about, you touched on plans for a follow-up survey. Can you talk more about that and what you hope to learn from the follow-up?
Well, I've certainly been thinking about it. And I'm thinking that maybe sometime mid-fall might be a good time for us, because we're still going through a lot of changes. The reorganization is practically finished. The website is practically finished. There's a lot of things I'd like to see, and I know that our Reference and User Services Department is getting ready for a lot more instruction and things like that. So there's still more potential, and I think that sometime next year, next semester will be a good time to redo this.
I could add to that as well. We, like I had mentioned in my slides, that half of our patrons are public patrons, or Broward County residents. So our public relations and media services, they contacted an outside marketing group to do some market research with similar questions to what we asked in this one. And many of the responses mirrored what we saw in this survey. And kind of like a real snapshot is people, they love our services when they know about us, but we've got to do better in getting out there and marketing what we do. And that you heard that from Broward County residents and what we call sharks, faculty, staff, and students.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question. Thank you, Rick, for this. Was any piece of information that you garnered that was unexpected, or any other kind of surprises?
I'm not recalling anything unexpected, but I agree with Susan about the text answers as well. Going through those, it was really heartwarming to see how many respondents just complimented the library staff overall and how impactful they were on their learning and research journeys.
Yeah, it's very easy to focus on all the negatives, but we really want to focus on the positives too, because our staff works really hard in making sure that our patrons get what they need. And again, we have a bigger audience because we also have our public, so we've got a big group to satisfy.
And once again, the satisfaction with the library staff, that was mirrored in both the public market research study and the NewsBank study. Being the administrator, the thing that bothered me was that that's often called a compliment, and I know the staff knows what we're saying, like, you're the greatest secret, or you're the biggest secret in Broward County. Well, nobody wants to hear that, at least on the public side.
As a marketing person, I feel for you when you hear that, certainly. Yes, the questions are great, so keep them coming in. We have several more. From Victor, did the survey help you better understand how the library services and collections impact student learning outcomes and academic success? Was that part of on your radar?
Jamie, I think you should respond, because we built a division around those services.
Right. So while we can't make any direct correlations from the survey and academic success, what we are seeing is where we were meeting the student needs and where we had opportunities for improvement. So I would say we were doing good in a lot of areas, but there was a lot of opportunities to enhance what we were offering. So you heard when I talked about we were already involved in the Unit 1000 course and orientation, but we saw opportunities to get even further embedded when the new undergraduate student orientation handbook came out. And we we had a very short turnaround time for that, but when the opportunity fell into our laps, it was kind of a drop everything and focus on this. I mean, it was like a 24-hour turnaround, and we did, and we really focused on all of the services and resources that would help students throughout their journey, and we're hitting them, you know, right at the beginning of their learning experience at NSU, and I thought that was really important, and I think that's, you know, I think that's really essential, is getting connected to the students and connecting them with our resources right from the get-go of their academic journey here.
And I'm going to add something to that too, because another thing that that staff has been doing is once everyone was back on campus, they've been kind of going to where the students are. So they'll do a pop-up in their dorms, or they'll do something at the UC or someplace where the students are gathering. So they're meeting them where they are if they're not necessarily coming into the library.
Yeah, and just want to add to that as well. One of the things that we've been partnership with the student affair is the last couple of years we did something called Navigate the Library, which is the beginning of the fall semesters, and that's when the first week when the freshmen come into the library and the NSU on campus, we have staff from our different departments have a table and show them the resources that we have. So that's been very successful as well.
Wonderful, great. We do have a question about if we can share the survey questionnaire, and yes, we absolutely can. If you want to leave your contact information, or you can put it in the question chats or in the survey when we follow up, we'll definitely reach out to you with that. So thank you for that question.
And they can reach out to Peter or I too. With our emails.
Absolutely. The contact information is on the screen right now, actually. Yes, so feel free to shoot an email over anytime. A question about the emphasis on marketing. It makes me think how to integrate library services at the point of need. Understanding it's kind of a trendy expression, but there is a need to know what's going on in the information landscape of users. So any tips on trying to understand that landscape? So yeah, what were the marketing, what were some of the achieve the best results of marketing efforts?
I'll pick up some of this right here. So we went through a transition right before we launched this survey. We had lost our in-house library marketing folks, and we most of those marketing types were centralized with university administration and the public relations division. So, you know, it's training. You know, we're librarians, we're prescriptive. So this is what we do. This is what we're trying to communicate. Eventually, we determined that if we really wanted to get the ROI on these resources that we're spending hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, that we need to invest in marketing. So we were able to get our marketing folks back, and we put them in a department outside the two divisions of the AULs here. For the most part, Jamie Goldman is, and this is an oversimplification, she handles the public services, and Pia handles systems, technology support, archives, things that are not so much public facing, but there's a public facing component to everything. But I wanted the marketing, the department was library engagement, promotion, and partnerships. Develop partnerships, engage them, and promote, and they're the tip of the spear.
Any other to add?
Yeah, I can also add to that we have been talking to a lot of the patron segments from the survey to get a sense of when they want to hear about programs and services and how, because, you know, we were definitely seeing that was a trend in the survey for both patron segments. And something we learned from students is they information seek very different from the faculty. I think Jim mentioned earlier that, you know, students tend not to always open up their emails, and so we've actually had some focus groups with our library student advisory board where they said, if you tell me too far out, it's great to know, put on my calendar, but I'm going to forget about it. So I want to know 2 weeks in advance. You know, I want to hear about it on social media or in an event that I'm at. Like Susan mentioned earlier, all of these pop-up libraries we've been doing and outreach across campus have been really impactful with reaching the students with our information.
Those are great tips, great tips. And we do have a question about NewsBank's role from Susan, and I think maybe our Susan Berkman, you might be able to speak to this. What was NewsBank's role in the survey? Did they just distribute, market it, evaluate? Can you talk about that?
Okay, so NewsBank, it was, first of all, it was their idea. So let's start with that to do this. And, you know, it just had happened that I had been at this conference where I just heard about a survey that I thought was useful. So we sat down and we started looking at the questions there. Plus NewsBank had done questions, you know, done surveys with other organizations. So we kind of looked at what we would be interested in finding out and decided for this particular survey not to focus on the public patrons, but just to focus on the faculty, staff, and students. So there was a lot of back and forth on the questions. Again, our reference staff at the time helped develop those questions, make sure we were covering all the services and resources that we wanted to have. And then they were really instrumental. It was back and forth. They just needed to know who they could work with within our organization. And that's where we got, you know, institutional effectiveness and systems involved in actually programming the survey and getting it out. They were, you know, it was kind of like we had a timeline. When should the emails go out and who should they come from? What should they say? And then there was, once the surveys were going through, we were getting, you know, kind of updates on the numbers as they were coming in, how many, you know, were coming in. And when it came to the analysis, our institutional effectiveness basically had many spreadsheets and whatever that were handed over to NewsBank to kind of slice and dice and try to figure out what makes sense for us to present. And that took a bit of time. And then once that was done, they basically kind of, you know, NewsBank put together a report that they first shared with me, and we tweaked it a little bit, and then it was presented to our administration here. And, you know, all along our intention was eventually to share how we did it and what we did with a larger audience. But NewsBank was a great partner in all of this, and they did have quite a role.
Thank you very much for that, Susan. Thank you. And to Susan, who asked the question, thank you very much. Yes, well, thank you to everyone for all of these fantastic questions and your engagement with us here today. We are so pleased to be able to share these results with you. And as you're thinking about or planning a survey for your institution's library, we hope that we can be a resource for you. So I want to say thank you to this esteemed panel for taking the time to share the information with us. I know that you're very busy. It's a very busy time of year in academics, and so we're grateful for your time and your partnership. And as Susan mentioned, NewsBank researchers have supported several institutions around the country to help formulate surveys. So if you have any questions, again, please reach out to Susan or Peter Simon. The contact information is there on the screen. We are more than happy to work with you. Also, I would like to invite you back next week. If you'd like to know more about NewsBank and our flagship resources, we are hosting a webinar next week, May 2nd at 1 o'clock. We'll share information about NewsBank resources, how to pinpoint information, and strategies for how to get it into the hands of users. So please join us, or if you have a colleague you feel would benefit from that, we encourage you to share the link. It'll be in the follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow along with the recording. We hope you found today's presentation valuable and that you have some actionable ways to enhance the survey that you're thinking about for your institution and your patrons and communities and researchers. As you log out today, please take a moment. We have a very brief survey. We'd like to know what you thought about our session and how we can improve in the future. On behalf of NewsBank and the NOVA teams, thank you for sharing part of your day with us. Goodbye.
Thank you to NewsBank also.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.